The bay. The traveler turned and saw beyond the road a beautiful mare, not very tall, but a mare whose every inch of her 15.3 proclaimed strength and speed. At that moment she raised her head and looked across to him, and the heart of the rider jumped into his throat. The sight of her was an omen of victory, and he made a long stride in her direction, but the two men came before him. The old man jumped from the chair and tapped his arm. "You ain't gonna take the bay without gettin' leave from Doone." "Gents, I got to," said the stranger. "Listen, my name's Gregg, Bill Gregg. Up in my country they know I'm straight. Down here you ain't heard of me. I ain't gonna keep the horse, and I'll pay $100 for the use of her for 1 day. I'll bring or send her back safe and sound tomorrow. Here's the money. One of you gents that's a friend of Doone, take it for him." Not a hand was stretched out. Every head shook in negation. "I'm too fond of the little life left to me," said the old man. "I won't rent out the hoss for him. Why, he loves that mare like she was his sister. He'd fight like a flash rather than see another man ride her." But Bill Gregg had his eyes on the bay, and the sight of her was stealing his reason. He knew, as well as he knew that he was a man, that once in the saddle on her he would be sure to win. Nothing could stop him. And straight through the restraining circle he broke with a groan of anxiety. Only the old man who had been the spokesman called after him, "Gregg, don't be a fool. Maybe you don't recognize the name Doone, but the whole name is Ronicky Doone. Does that mean anything to you?" Into the back of Gregg's mind came several faint memories, but they were obscure and uncertain. "Blast your Ronicky Doone," he replied. "I got to have that hoss, and if none of you'll take the money for her rent, I'll take her free and pay the rent when I come back through this way tomorrow, maybe. So long." While he spoke he had been undoing the cinches of his own horse. Now he whipped the saddle and bridle off, shouted to the hotel keeper brief instructions for care of the weary animal, and ran across the road with the saddle on his arm. In the corral he had no difficulty with the mare. She came straight to him in spite of all the flopping trappings. With prickly ears and eyes lighted with kindly curiosity she looked the dusty fellow over. He slipped the bridle over her head. When he swung the saddle over her back she merely turned her head and carelessly watched it fall. And when he drew up the cinches hard she only stamped in mock anger. The moment he was in the saddle she tossed her head eagerly, ready to be off. He looked across the street to the veranda of the hotel as he passed through the gate of the corral. The men were standing in a long and awe-stricken line, their eyes wide, their mouths agape. Whoever Ronicky Doone might be, he was certainly a man who had won the respect of this town. The men on the veranda looked at Bill Gregg as though he were already a ghost. He waved his hand defiantly at them, and the mare, at a word from him, sprang into a long striding gallop that whirled them rapidly down the street and out of the village. The bay carried him with amazing speed over the ground. They rounded the base of the big mountain, and glancing up at the ragged canyons which chopped the face of the peak, he was glad that he had not attempted that shortcut. If Ronicky Doone could make that trail, he was a skillful horseman. Bill Gregg swung up over the left shoulder of the mountain, and found himself looking down on the wide plain which held Stillwater. The air was crystal clear and dry. The shoulder of the mountain was high above it. Gregg saw a breathless stretch of cattle country at one sweep of his eyes. Stillwater was still a long way off, and far away across the plain he saw a tiny moving dot that grew smaller. It was the train heading for Stillwater, and that train must be beat to the station. For a moment his heart stood still. Then he saw the train was distant indeed, and by the slightest use of the mare's speed he would be able to reach town 2 or 3 minutes ahead of it. But just as he was beginning to exult in the victory, after all the hard riding of the past 3 days, the mare tossed up her head and shortened her stride. The heart of Gregg stopped, and he went cold. It was not only the fear that his journey might be ruined, but the fear that something had happened to this magnificent creature beneath him. He swung to the side in the saddle and watched her gallop. Certain she went laboring, very much as though she were trying to run against a mighty pull of the reins. He looked at her head. It was thrown high with pricking ears. Perhaps she was frightened by some foolish thing near the road.